Although Aphex Twin said in an interview electronic music shouldn't be talked about, we are going to talk about it. Year 1992 in Irish music recalls Sinead O'Connor tearing up Pope's photo, Linda Martin winning Eurovision, and the 21-year-old Ireland-born Richard David James coming up with his first full album, Selected Ambient Works 85-92, which is often considered his best album up to date. As the name of the album suggests, he has been interested in electronics since his early teens. He was getting old analog gear and he was building electronic circuits from scratch. And one thing that really inspired him was his old computer Spectrum ZX, which was making some horrible noises, you may say, but there are albums with similar music like this, and I can see why it was inspirational.
We are the music makers, and we are the dreamers of dreams.
Aphex Twin said sampling was not his favorite activity for a producer. He tried to create something original, although he did use some samples, like the quote, "We are the music makers" from Willy Wonka. And I also think you can hear on this album echo of its times, like acid house, but you can also hear echo of much older music, like Brian Eno's ambient, especially in the song called I, which was reportedly the oldest recorded song here. This type of combination eventually gained a label called IDM, Intelligent Dance Music. Aphex Twin wasn't too fond of the term himself, saying that au contraire everything else has to be stupid. Well, maybe not everything, but most is. I didn't know Aphex Twin when I was a child. I've heard its stuff when I was a much older person, and I could quickly identify this album was influential for other artists. I think Birds of Canada are typically mentioned as its literal music children, but I've also heard the percussion parts being used in a number of techno tracks that came out in the 90s that sound like straight taken from this album. For example, this. So now I had a chance to listen to this album 30 years after it came out, and I can tell you my favorite song is Extal, that opens this album, with extremely warm sound and dreamy vocals. Generally this whole beginning speaks to me very well. Ta is a beautiful follow-up, ambient in the first layer like a bed cover, techno beat in the background, and further in the background you also hear some sounds like some airport messages being announced through the speaker, which of course brings up that famous quote that ambient music is for airports. One funny thing I noticed is Aphex Twin reportedly hated trance music, but some of the musical pictures he's painting here sound pretty much like early trance, exactly in the moment when the term was coined. Let's listen to the song Diamond Bullet by Effective Force. It came out in '91. So on Selected Ambient Works 85-92 you can even hear sounds of Goa. I think it's because all of these runners had common ancestor. All of them were sort of influenced by acid house. So for example, Green Calx sounds very sour, has a lot of acid in it. To be honest, later as the album keeps playing I tend to space out at some point, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm feeling like I'm under some sort of hypnosis. Maybe it was even supposed to be like that. While making these videos I had a chance to go through a lot of interviews with Aphex Twin. He seems like such an original person, talks like for the sake of it, almost like he's trying to avoid interviews altogether, but he's forced to give them. I know a lot of artists like to give hot takes to become famous, but with Aphex Twin it sounds so natural, like he wouldn't care what others think about him. To answer the question if the album still sounds good and valid after 30 years, well, it definitely sounds like a product of its times. So for some people it can be a cool thing, for a lot of people it can bring nostalgia, but it's also possible that a lot of new listeners will be not familiar with this form and they would prefer some newer forms of electronic music. A song that according to my ear test could come out today is Shotki 7th Path, maybe Head Fell Limb? If you have another candidate, let me know. A song that sounds the most like 80s techno, it's PTOLEMY, but this one is a banger. Another thing that fits in the current era is how Aphex Twin made this album, in his bedroom. Now when the access to music making tools is easy and you can easily upload your stuff online, we suddenly have a lot of fairly decent do-it-yourself music producers. Aphex Twin's story and product is one of the best in this regard. My favorite feeling on Selected Ambient Works is the warmth of the sound, great for winter. If there is something I might want to correct, maybe I would remove 2 songs, especially like from the last part of the album, but not Action, because I think it ends the album on a reasonably high note. It has this strong up-tempo rhythm and repeatable theme. It sounds like a dot at the end of the sentence.